Welcome everyone to our third video, A Moral and Virtuous Government. I want to start out by looking at what those forefathers described as natural law. In this natural law, it's basically defined in the early days by Marcus Cicero. Now, keep in mind, he was a Roman person, he was an atheist. But he believed that we must love and respect and obey a wise creator. Even though he was atheist, he really thought there was something out there greater than we were. And he said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Now think of this person as not being religious, but having the same concepts as most of Christianity does. Okay? Again, their vision was to build that moral and virtuous government. Again, they wanted to try to stay away from that corruption. Most of all, they wanted to have that opportunity for everyone to prosper, not just the haves. They wanted to get rid of the haves and the have-nots and give everybody the ability to say, this is what I want. I'm willing to work this hard to get it. As we look at Mr. Jefferson, he believed that without virtue and morality, the Constitution and this government could not be maintained. Now, in the next several slides, we're going to talk a lot about Thomas Jefferson. And I want you to remember those original 59 signers of the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence, I should say. He was about the second least religious. And then think of the things that you're going to see that he did and he said. Okay? Virtue is not hereditary. It must be earned and learned. And he's right. It's like feeding information into a computer. If you put bad information in, you're going to get bad information out. We have to be taught those morals. We have to continue to have those reinforced so we don't lose them. Okay, and here's the Kentucky Resolution was in 1778 when Mr. Jefferson was a senator. It wasn't known until many years later that he was one of the authors of this. But at that point in time, there was what they described as the Alien and Secession Act, where the guts of it was really saying that if we ever get into a war with this country, we may somehow have to restrict the people and confine the people from that country so they don't fight against us. You know, Mr. Jefferson didn't like that idea. And as he was coming back and helped write this, I think the really important part that I see in here is that last statement where it says, equality with heresy and false religions are withheld from the cognizance of the federal tribunals. In other words, this being not a really religious man, but he said, when we look at the courts of this country, they should have nothing to say about religion and have no jurisdiction over it. But yet, we'll get into separation of church and state late in a little bit here. You know, they believed that in our school systems, there should be three things taught. Religion, the five principles of, not any given religion, we'll get to those five principles in a minute, morality, and knowledge. And they believed that was the order they should be taught in, because they wanted to keep this a country that would stay free. In the Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance, it was stated that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall always be encouraged. But yet today, we don't want anything said of that in a public situation. Those five fundamentals of religion that they promoted was, there is a creator out there that's above us, and we should worship that creator. There's a moral code that that creator has given us that tells us what's right or wrong, which is that objective truth. That we will be held responsible for our actions on earth when we die. They believe there was an afterlife, and again, that we will be judged later for what we do when we're on earth. Again, I think that's the principles of many religions, especially in the Christian side of it. But yet today, we think it's a bad thing to teach our children that. As we go back on December 4th, 1800, the members of Congress voted to hold church services in the Hall of Congress. That was done for nearly a century By 1857, that church had become the biggest church in the United States. But yet today we're not supposed to do that in a public building or a public place. Their argument on that is that, well, you have to give equal time to everybody. So if this religion says something, this one has to have equal time. Guess what? That's called tolerance. We look at the majority. If we don't like something, whether it might be a prayer before a sporting event or something else, for those that don't believe in a God, tolerate it. Close your ears. Leave till it's done. And then come back. That's what gave you your freedom. It's why you enjoy being here. But you have to have tolerance to make it all work. And here we're going to get into that famous statement of separation of church and state. Now, this is probably the main excerpt out of that letter that Mr. Jefferson replied to the members of the Danbury Baptist who came to him when he was president and said, "We want you to declare the Baptist religion the religion of the state." These people came to this country because they did not want the government stating whose religion you want to be. They weren't afraid of having religion and the morals of that religion being part of the government. They didn't want the government to be one and then to control everybody else, and we lost that religious freedom. So he basically came back and said, the government has no power to dictate what religion anybody worships. That's up to the local communities and the churches to make that decision in the states, not the federal government. Whether it be the legislative branch or the judicial, doesn't make any difference. As we look at his second inaugural address, he again talks about that same situation, that religion is important, but it should be left to the powers of the state and society, not the federal government. But yet today we come in and we try to skew the words that he brought up. In 1954, through the workings of several organizations in that Pledge of Allegiance, the statement that one nation under God was added. And Mr. Eisenhower came back and again stated we must have that humbleness and know that without God, we wouldn't be where we're at today. This great country. Now, at this point, I really try to make two pleas in here. One is to those of you that have fought so very hard to take religious freedom away from those who want it, ban it from what we do in society and public places, try to ban it in the government. Please go out there and look at all the inscriptions of God that are on the various institutions in Washington, D.C. If you look at it and you say that what I've put out here tonight and say, I really do believe that this government was based on religious and moral values. If it's a great country and that's what it was formed on, why do we want to go away from it? Even for those of you that may not like it or want or believe in a God, that's fine. Tolerate that if that's what made the country great. And for those of you that are in that higher end judicial system, you go back to 1879 when you first tried to start legislating from the bench and say that religion needed to be taken out of the schools and things of that nature. It is not. The forefathers, I believe, saw lots of things out there. And they could figure out what they should or shouldn't do. And when they put this government together and it's one watching over the other, it was great. But I think the one thing they did not contemplate was a rogue Supreme Court that would try to legislate from the bench. That concludes our third video on a moral and virtuous government. Please join us in our next video for socialism, welfare, and corruption.